the Mercy ship's last stand. The UM's healing light drifted silently through the neutral zone, her white hull gleaming against the backdrop of distant stars. Red crosses painted on every surface marked her as a vessel of mercy, protected by the sacred covenant that had kept medical ships safe for 3 centuries. Dr. Sarah Chen walked through the pristine corridors, her footsteps echoing softly on polished metal floors as she made her morning rounds. The ship stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, housing the most advanced medical facilities in known space. Within her halls, beings from dozens of different worlds worked side by side, united by a single purpose: to heal the wounded regardless of species, faction, or ideology. Sarah paused at observation deck 7, gazing out at the swirling nebula that provided cover for their operations. The healing light had been stationed here for 8 months, treating casualties from the ongoing war between the Terran Federation and the Vorthan Empire. Dr. Chen, we have incoming wounded, called Nurse Martinez over the intercom. Sarah's attention snapped back to duty as she hurried toward the emergency bay. The automatic doors hissed open, revealing her medical team. Preparing for arrivals, humans worked alongside Zeltharian medics, their crystalline forms catching the light as they moved. Corvan surgeons, despite their intimidating appearance, possessed healing abilities that had saved countless lives aboard the ship. Commander Jackson, the ship's captain, met Sarah at the medical bay entrance. His weathered face showed the strain of months spent in the war zone, but his eyes remained kind. We picked up a distress signal from a Terran patrol vessel, he explained. Heavy casualties. They're requesting immediate medical assistance. Sarah nodded, already mentally preparing for the influx of wounded soldiers. The healing light's reputation had spread throughout the sector, and both sides of the conflict knew they could find sanctuary here. The first shuttle arrived 30 minutes later, carrying 15 wounded Terran Marines. Sarah watched as her team worked with practiced efficiency, triaging patients and rushing the most critical cases to surgery. Among the wounded was Lieutenant Commander Davies, a young officer with severe plasma burns covering half his body. As Sarah worked to stabilize him, she marveled at the dedication of these soldiers who fought for their beliefs, knowing they might never see home again. "Doctor, we have another incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Park. "It's from a Vorthan vessel this time." Sarah looked up from her patient, surprised. Vorthan ships rarely requested human medical assistance, preferring to handle their wounded through their own military hospitals. The message came through clearly despite heavy static. "Human medical vessel, this is Captain Thax of the destroyer. Shadowclaw, we have suffered catastrophic damage and require immediate assistance. We have 37 wounded aboard." Captain Jackson appeared at Sarah's side, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think, Doc? Could be a trap," Sarah considered the possibility, but ultimately shook her head. "We've treated Vorthan wounded before, Commander. The sacred covenant protects us. Besides, if they wanted to attack us, they wouldn't need an elaborate deception." Jackson nodded slowly, signaled the Vorthan vessel. "Tell them we're dispatching rescue shuttles." The Shadowclaw was in terrible condition when the healing light shuttles reached her. Massive holes had been torn in her hull, and atmosphere leaked steadily into space. The Vorthan crew, reptilian beings standing nearly 3 meters tall, waited grimly as human medics boarded their ship. Captain Thax, despite his own injuries, maintained the rigid dignity typical of his species. "Human healers," he spoke in heavily accented standard, "my crew is grateful for your assistance. Sarah led the evacuation effort personally, coordinating the transfer of wounded Vorthans to the Healing Light's medical bays. Many of the injuries were severe, requiring immediate surgery, as she worked to save a young Vorthan communications. Officer Sarah reflected on the irony of treating soldiers who had been trying to kill humans just hours before. Yet this was the essence of what they did aboard the Healing Light. They chose healing over hatred, compassion over conflict. The rescued Vorthans were settled into Medical Bay 7, where they found themselves sharing space with the Terran Marines who had arrived earlier. Sarah watched nervously as natural enemies lay just meters apart, separated only by medical equipment and monitors. To her relief, both groups remained focused on recovering from their injuries rather than continuing their conflict. Lieutenant Commander Davies even offered water to a wounded Vorthan soldier in the bed beside him. 3 days passed peacefully as the medical staff worked around the clock to treat both groups of patients. Sarah began to feel hopeful that this could serve as an example of how peace might be possible between the warring factions. The wounded soldiers shared stories, played simple games, and slowly began to see each other as individuals rather than enemies. Captain Thax expressed his gratitude repeatedly, promising to speak favorably of human medical practices when he returned to his fleet. Everything changed on the 4th day. Sarah was in surgery, repairing damaged organs in a Vorthan engineer, when alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors as the intercom crackled to life. All stations, this is the bridge. We have multiple Vorthan warships approaching at high speed. All medical staff remain at your posts and continue treating patients. Sarah's hands remained steady as she continued the delicate surgery, but her mind raced. Vorthan military vessels. Approaching could mean many things, but none of them seemed particularly good. She completed the operation and rushed to the bridge, where Captain Jackson stood, studying tactical displays with growing concern. 23 Vorthan warships had emerged from hyperspace, their weapons powered and targeting systems active. "They're hailing us," reported the communications officer. Jackson nodded grimly. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the scarred face of Admiral Vex, commander of the Vorthan Third Fleet. His yellow eyes burned with cold fury as he spoke. "Human vessel, you will immediately surrender all Terran military personnel and submit to boarding. You have 30 minutes to comply." Jackson stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Admiral, this is a medical vessel operating under the Sacred Covenant. We have wounded from both our factions aboard, including your own people. We are protected under galactic law." Admiral Vex's expression darkened further. "The Sacred Covenant is a human invention designed to protect your spies and saboteurs. We no longer recognize its authority. Surrender now or face the consequences." Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized the implications. The Vorthans intended to attack a hospital ship, something that hadn't happened in over 3 centuries of galactic civilization. "Admiral," she interrupted, stepping into view of the camera. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief Medical Officer. We have 37 of your wounded aboard, including Captain Thax. They're receiving the best possible care. Surely you don't intend to endanger your own people." The Admiral's eyes focused on Sarah with unmistakable hatred. "Captain Thax and his crew are already dead to us. They showed weakness by accepting human aid. Better they die as examples than live as symbols of Vorthan shame." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jackson immediately activated ship-wide communications. "All hands, This is the captain. The Vorthan fleet is preparing to attack. This violates every principle of civilized warfare, but we must prepare for the worst. Sarah rushed back to the medical bays, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. The wounded Vorthans looked up at her with expressions of confusion and growing fear. Captain Thax struggled to sit up in his bed. Dr. Chen, what is happening? Why do our ships threaten you? Sarah knelt beside his bed, her voice gentle but urgent. Your admiral has declared that accepting our help makes you traitors. He intends to destroy this ship with all of us aboard. The revelation sent shockwaves through the medical bay. Vorthan and human soldiers who had been slowly building friendships now faced the possibility of dying together. Lieutenant Commander Davies pulled himself upright despite his injuries. Doc, how many people are on this ship? Sarah's voice was quiet. 12,000 souls. Medical staff, patients, and support personnel from 15 different species. As if summoned by her words, the first energy blast struck the healing light's starboard side. The ship shuddered violently, emergency lighting flickering on as main power wavered. Through the viewports, Sarah could see the Vorthan fleet firing in coordinated volleys. Their weapons designed to cripple rather than destroy immediately. They wanted the ship to suffer before it died. Captain Jackson's voice echoed through the corridors over the intercom system. To any vessels receiving this transmission, this is Captain Jackson of the UMS Healing Light. We are a medical vessel under attack by Vorthan forces. We have 12,000 beings aboard, including wounded from multiple species. We are operating under the Sacred Covenant and pose no military threat. Mayday, mayday, mayday. The attack continued for nearly an hour, with the Vorthians destroying the ship's engines, life support systems, and defensive capabilities. Sarah and her medical team worked frantically to treat new casualties as the ship came apart around them. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space, and several medical bays had to be evacuated when structural damage made them unsafe. In medical Bay 7, Sarah found herself working alongside Captain Thax, who had insisted on helping despite his own injuries. Together, they treated human and Vorthan wounded with equal care, even as their ship died around them. Dr. Thax said quietly as he helped stabilize a young human nurse, I want you to know that not all Vorthans support this madness. What Admiral Vex does here today will haunt our species for generations. The final assault came without warning. Sarah was in the children's ward, helping evacuate young patients to interior compartments, when the Vorthons targeted the ship's reactor. The explosion tore through the healing light's heart, sending shockwaves that buckled hull plating and shattered internal bulkheads. Emergency power failed throughout most of the ship, leaving vast sections in darkness. Sarah found herself trapped in a collapsed section of corridor, her legs pinned beneath fallen debris. Through a crack in the hull, she could see stars spinning lazily as the ship tumbled through space, no longer under any form of control. Her communicator crackled with voices from throughout the ship, people saying goodbye to loved ones, medical staff still trying to help patients, and children crying in the darkness. Captain Jackson's final transmission reached every corner of the dying ship. To all crew and passengers of the UMS Healing Light, it has been my honor to serve with you. We came here to heal the wounded and ease suffering in this galaxy. Today, we prove that compassion knows no boundaries of species or faction. Though we die here in the darkness between stars, our message will survive. Healers are sacred, and those who attack them will face justice. As the ship's final moments approached, Sarah used her emergency communicator to record a message. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen aboard the hospital ship, Healing Light. We are being destroyed by Admiral Vex of the Vorthan, Third Fleet, while treating wounded from both sides of this war. 12,000 beings, including children and medical personnel, are dying because we chose to heal rather than hate. Let our deaths serve as a reminder that mercy must be protected, and those who would destroy it must face the consequences." The Healing Light's hull finally gave way completely, venting the last of her atmosphere into the void. Sarah's final sight was of Captain Thax, still trying to shield a wounded human child with his own body as the ship broke apart around them. In those last moments, she felt oddly peaceful. They had stayed true to their principles until the very end, proving that some things were worth dying for. The automated distress beacon launched just before the ship's complete destruction, carrying with it the complete medical records, casualty reports, and Sarah's final message. It would take the beacon 18 hours to reach the nearest human outpost, but when it did, the galaxy would learn what had happened to the UMS Healing Light and the 12,000 souls who died trying to heal the wounded. Asterisk, when humanity stopped. Holding back the distress beacon from the Healing Light reached Starbase Apollo at 0347 hours, Terran Standard Time. Communications Officer Reynolds was monitoring routine traffic when the priority emergency signal cut through all other transmissions. The message was clear, devastating, and impossible to believe. A hospital ship had been deliberately destroyed with all hands by Vorthan forces. Reynolds stared at her screen for several long moments before hitting the emergency alert that would wake the entire command structure. Within minutes, Admiral Torres was in the communications center, her grey hair disheveled from sleep, but her eyes sharp and focused. She had commanded the Terran Defense Fleet for 12 years, fighting a careful war of attrition against the Vorthan Empire. Now she stood listening to Dr. Sarah Chun's final message, watching tactical data that showed 23 Vorthan warships systematically destroying a clearly marked medical vessel. "How long ago did this happen?" she asked quietly. "Signal lag puts the attack at approximately 19 hours ago," Admiral Reynolds replied. "The beacon contains complete medical records showing patients from 15 different species, including 37 Vorthan soldiers who were being treated aboard the ship." Torres closed her eyes, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest. In 40 years of military service, she had never heard of anyone deliberately attacking a hospital ship. The Sacred Covenant wasn't just law, it was the foundation of civilized warfare itself. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Torres ordered. "Priority 1, encryption. And wake up every department head on this station. I want full tactical assessment in my office in 30 minutes. As her staff hurried to comply, Torres stood, alone in the communications center, watching the final moments of the Healing Light play out on the tactical display. 12,000 beings had died while trying to save lives. The Vorthans had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. President Maxwell was in a secure conference room beneath the Swiss Alps when Admiral Torres' message reached Earth. The leader of the Terran Federation was a former diplomat who had spent her career trying to find peaceful solutions to conflicts. Now she sat surrounded by her cabinet, watching footage of humanity's largest hospital ship being torn apart by enemy fire. The images were crystal clear. Red crosses clearly visible, medical shuttles desperately trying to evacuate patients, and children's faces pressed against viewports as their sanctuary died around them. "Options," Maxwell said quietly, when the recording ended. Defense Secretary Harrison was the first to speak. Limited nuclear strike against the fleet responsible. Send a clear message that attacks on medical vessels will not be tolerated. Foreign. Secretary Kim shook her head. That would escalate beyond all control. We need diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, something that doesn't drag us into total war. Maxwell studied the faces around the table, seeing the same shock and rage she felt reflected in their expressions. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to building a better galaxy through cooperation and understanding. But they had just watched evil triumph over compassion, and diplomacy seemed inadequate in the face of such deliberate cruelty. "What about Protocol 7?" she asked quietly. The room fell silent. Protocol 7 was humanity's most closely guarded secret, known only to the highest levels of government. For 2 centuries, while building relationships with other species and establishing trade agreements, humanity had been quietly preparing for the possibility that their peaceful nature might be mistaken for weakness. Hidden shipyards in asteroid belts had been building vessels far beyond anything other species imagined possible. Research stations disguised as agricultural colonies had been developing weapons technology that could reshape the balance of power. In the galaxy, Defense Secretary Harrison nodded slowly. "We have the capability, Madame President. Full deployment would take 72 hours to coordinate across all systems. But once we begin, there's no going back. The galaxy will see what humanity is truly capable of when we stop holding back." Maxwell stood and walked to the window overlooking the mountain valley below. Somewhere out there, families were beginning to hear that their loved ones had died aboard the peeling light. Parents were learning that children who had volunteered to heal the wounded would never come home. Asterisk. "Authorization granted," Maxwell said finally. "Protocol 7 is now active. Show them what happens when they attack our healers." Within hours, encrypted signals were racing across human space, reaching hidden facilities that had waited decades for this moment. On Luna's far side, massive doors opened in what appeared to be natural rock formations, revealing ship construction facilities that dwarfed anything previously seen. In the asteroid belt, mining stations shed their civilian disguises and began launching warships that had been concealed for generations. Admiral Torres received her new orders 6 hours later. She was no longer commanding a defensive fleet trying to protect human territory. She now had access to the Strategic Reserve Fleet, vessels so advanced that their existence had been one of humanity's most carefully guarded secrets. The ships that emerged from hidden bases across human space looked nothing like the workmanlike destroyers and cruisers that had been fighting the Vorthins for 3 years. The new vessels were sleek predators, their hulls incorporating stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to enemy sensors. Their weapons systems were based on principles that other species were still trying to understand. Most importantly, they carried AI systems that could process tactical information and coordinate attacks at speeds that organic minds couldn't match. Humanity had been preparing for total war while the galaxy believed they were peaceful traders and explorers. Torres stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the TFS Retribution, as the assembled fleet prepared to depart. 87 vessels of impossible design surrounded her ship, their crews consisting of the best personnel from across human space. Many of these officers had been secretly training for years, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Now that day had arrived, and they were ready to show the galaxy what humanity could accomplish when mercy was met with cruelty. The first target was Admiral Vex's fleet. still patrolling the system where they had destroyed the healing light. The Vorthans had made no attempt to conceal their location, apparently proud of their attack on the hospital ship. Torres watched their positions on the tactical display, feeling no satisfaction at what was about to happen. This wasn't about victory or conquest. It was about sending a message that some lines could never be crossed. The attack began without warning. Vorthan's sensors couldn't detect the approaching human fleet until weapons were already firing. Energy beams more precise than surgical lasers cut through enemy hulls, targeting specific systems while leaving life support intact. This wasn't about killing Vorthan crews. It was about demonstrating absolute technological superiority. Within 17 minutes, Admiral Vex's entire fleet was disabled, their weapons offline and engines dead. Torres opened a communication channel to Vex's flagship. The Vorthan admiral appeared on screen, his yellow eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Behind him, his bridge crew worked frantically at controls that no longer responded. "Admiral Vex," Torres said calmly, "you destroyed a hospital ship carrying 12,000 beings, including your own wounded. You violated the sacred covenant that has protected healers for 3 centuries. Your fleet is now disabled, and you are under arrest for crimes against galactic civilization." But this was only the beginning. Across Vorthan space, similar scenes played out as human fleets struck with overwhelming force and precision. Military bases were systematically dismantled, their personnel evacuated before the facilities were reduced to component atoms by weapons that defied conventional understanding. Vorthan warships found themselves unable to jump to hyperspace as human technology somehow interfered with their faster-than-light drives, trapping them in normal space where human forces could engage them at will. The speed and scope of humanity's offensive shocked the entire galaxy. Within 1 week, the Vorthan Empire's military capacity had been reduced by 70%. Their fleets were scattered, their bases destroyed, and their ability to wage war effectively eliminated. Yet remarkably, civilian casualties were nearly zero. Human forces went to extraordinary lengths to avoid harming non-combatants, even as they devastated military targets with ruthless efficiency. Other species watched in amazement and growing fear as humanity revealed capabilities that seemed impossible. The Zeltharians, who had considered themselves the galaxy's premier technologists, realized that human science was centuries ahead of anything they had imagined. The Corvan Empire, which had remained neutral in the human-Vorthan conflict, suddenly began reassessing their own defensive capabilities in light of this new reality. Emperor Thane of the Vorthan Empire found himself in an impossible position. His military commanders reported that continued resistance was futile. Humanity could apparently strike anywhere in Vorthan space at will, while their own forces remained trapped and vulnerable. The reports from captured officers described human technology that seemed almost magical in its capabilities. Weapons that could disassemble matter at the molecular level, shields that absorbed energy and redirected it back at attackers, ships that could appear and disappear as if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The surrender came exactly 14 days after the destruction of the healing light. Emperor Thane's image appeared on communication networks across the galaxy, his proud bearing reduced to defeated exhaustion. "The Vorthan Empire formally surrenders to the Terran Federation," he announced. "We accept full responsibility for the unprovoked attack on the hospital ship Healing Light and the murder of 12,000 innocent beings. We submit to whatever terms the humans deem appropriate." President Maxwell's response was broadcast from Geneva, her words carrying across civilized space. The Terran Federation accepts the Vorthan surrender. However, this conflict was never about conquest or territory. It was about protecting those who dedicate their lives to healing others. Emperor Thane, you will work with us to establish new protocols, ensuring that medical vessels and personnel are absolutely protected throughout the galaxy. The Sacred Covenant will be strengthened and enforced by joint human-alien peacekeeping forces. The treaty negotiations took place on the neutral world of Harmony Station, with representatives from dozens of species observing the proceedings. The final agreement established the Galactic Medical Protection Alliance, with enforcement powers that could deploy rapidly to protect hospital ships and medical facilities anywhere in known space. More importantly, it created a new category of war crimes specifically related to attacks on medical personnel and facilities. Admiral Torres found herself standing in the memorial garden that had been built where the healing light died. 12,000 small lights formed a spiral pattern in space, each one representing a life lost while trying to heal others. The garden would remain here forever, maintained by an automated system that would tell their story to anyone who passed through this region of space. Dr. Sarachen's final message played continuously, a reminder that compassion must be protected even in the darkest times. The Vorthan soldiers who had been treated aboard the Healing Light became unexpected ambassadors for peace. Captain Thax, who survived the ship's destruction in an escape pod, spent his remaining years traveling between worlds and telling the story of human medical staff who had given their lives to save their enemies. His testimony helped convince many species that humanity's strength came not from their hidden weapons, but from their commitment to healing rather than hurting. Years later, as the galaxy settled into an era of unprecedented peace, historians would debate whether humanity's revelation of their true military capabilities had been necessary. Some argued that the same result could have been achieved through diplomacy and economic pressure. Others maintained that only overwhelming force could have delivered the message that medical personnel must be protected above all else. President Maxwell, now in her final term, often visited the memorial garden in space. She would float there, in her environmental suit, looking at the lights that represented 12,000 souls who had died for the principle that healers were sacred. They showed us the cost of compassion, she would tell visitors. Now we must ensure that cost is never paid again. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their hidden weapons or advanced technology, but their absolute commitment to protecting those who chose to heal rather than hurt. And in the darkness between the stars, 12,000 lights continued to shine, reminding all who saw them that some principles were worth any price to defend. Asterisk,